For the third time in our journey of ascent, we find ourselves singing songs either composed by or dedicated to David. This short prayer invites us to soothe our inner and outer stirrings and be before God in quiet and confident hope. Let's read from the NIV. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore. This short poem is a simple, artful meditation composed, in typical Hebrew poetic fashion, of parallelism. It's a feature that probably feels familiar by now, but it is worth some exploration. My heart is not lifted up, as paired with another image. My eyes are not raised too high. Each are a colon, a line of poetry. As we've seen this in so many psalms so far, it helps to pause and ask the question, why these prayers seem to rephrase things often. Are they just saying the same thing twice? In Mark Futado's exegetical handbook, Interpreting the Psalms, he seeks to understand what these parallels accomplish. He states that usually there is some kind of movement from the first to the second colon, some kind of addition. Remember in Psalm 120, when the author uses the parallel destinations to represent a similar sentiment, woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Both are expressions of alienation, expressing exasperation at his feeling far from God. Parallels are not simply redundant rephrases, though, but the building of a composite picture. Whereas Meshech was made remote by its mountainous inaccessibility, Kedar was a place of nomadic desert life. The parallelism builds a composite geographical metaphor that expresses spiritual seclusion and restlessness. So here in 131, what do we make of lowered hearts and eyes? Let's investigate this with some help from a retired Wycliffe Bible translator, Dr. James Polig. As in all human cultures, body language is a conceptual metaphor. Describing one's emotional state in English, for example, can be expressed, for whatever reason, by color. You've heard these before. Feeling blue, being green with envy, or seeing red. They're all conceptual metaphors to help paint a word picture of the abstract realm of emotions. We come closer to our current context when we consider idioms of physical expression. Pinky out and nose in the air describe one's personality through physical gestures, idioms of body language. However, different cultures have different dialects of body language. For example, my wife, who worked in an elementary school with a population of Central American immigrants, noticed that these kids did not look their teachers in the eye as a sign of respect. It created some cross-cultural miscommunication as their teachers, raised to believe eye contact was a sign of attention, misunderstood their respectfulness as inattention and disrespect. Body language is not always universal. Even body language needs a translator. So we seek some help from our translator friend. According to Dr. Polig, raised eyes in ancient Hebrew culture are to be understood as a sign of arrogance. This is why the NIV translators have gone the extra step to help us interpret the idiom of Psalm 131's literal raised eyes. Haughtiness is in view, superiority. This is one part of the parallel, body language. We could literally observe one's eyes lowered in humility. Yet the other image in the parallel is more abstract, a heart not lifted. The verb here, lifted up or exalted, is how you would describe someone who is tall, such as Saul, who stood a head and shoulders above his peers in 1 Samuel 10:23. Another positional use of the verb is in Isaiah 7:11, when Isaiah facilitates a divine confrontation with King Ahaz. God challenges him to ask for a sign as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Just as distance was a metaphor describing relational status in Psalm 120 and 130, it is clear that height has a metaphoric quality. Looking further in Isaiah 55:9, God expresses that his ways are higher than the ways of man. Clearly, God is using this language of position not to describe location, but moral value. What then does it mean to keep a heart that is not lifted? A telling use of this Hebrew idiom is in Ezekiel 28, the classic passage against the king of Tyre. In 28:2, in the highness exaltation of his heart, this king enthrones himself as divine, saying to himself, I am a god. This is surely the semantic we have been seeking, that highness of heart is in fact self-worship. It is telling that Ezekiel seems to appeal to an earlier oral tradition, what some scholars have seen as the origin story of Satan, to describe the corruption awaiting the high-horsed king of Tyre. Ezekiel uses this verb 3 times in chapter 28, all dealing with the prideful self-idolatry of a self-absorbed king. And in 28:17, he shows the consequence, corruption. This word here is very evocative. It shows up in some of the most heartbreaking accounts in all of Scripture. God's painful observation about the corruption of humanity in Genesis 6:11, which motivates the flood. God's anger at Sinai when seeing his newlywed people dancing around a calf idol in Exodus 32:7. And here, according to the Ezekiel 28 tradition, a highness of heart was the locus of the corruption of even an angel. It's not safe to have a self-exalting heart. But wait, what even is a heart in the Hebrew mind? Oh, the slippery land of language. The Dictionary of Biblical Imagery is a wonderful resource to help capture the Hebraic view. Let me read from their passage on the heart. The heart is used metaphorically to describe the intangibles that constitute what it means to be human. To use a modern idiom, the heart is often used in the Bible to describe what makes us tick, that is, human personality. Okay, that's helpful. The heart then means your drive, your seat of your will, your very personhood. To have a heart that is not egocentric is to be a person of humility. Whereas the king of Tyre marvels at himself, King David marvels at Yahweh. The object of his awe is not his own personality, but the breathtaking mystery of the living God. As you seek to settle yourself into prayer, remember before whom you speak. Remember to marvel in God's beauty, things too wonderful for any of us to wrap our minds around. Our psalmist here brings before God this parallelism, a prayer resisting a self-exalting heart and a look of superiority. In 2 quick expressions of posture, he has illustrated his prayerful desire to come before God humbled and disarmed, like a child, like a weaned child with its mother. This king, who reigned over Israel near its military and political height, has likened his soul to a toddler. To keep oneself from pride and haughtiness, we find this kind of imagery so formative for our prayer lives. Would you, while attempting to pray this prayer, imagine yourself the marveling child, sitting held in the lap of your Creator? This may be the antidote for pride and its corrupting touch. This may just be the cure for feelings of alienation from God. Learn from the psalmist to use imagery to pull you into prayerful intimacy with God. What I find fascinating about this prayer is that, in some ways, this is a prayer within himself. Let me explain. David expresses this humbling struggle within, choosing not to pace endlessly through the things he doesn't understand, but instead to calm himself. He has changed the state of his own soul, soothing it, settling it, silencing it. He's done this. He's not saying God did it this time, though we shouldn't rule out divine activity in his efforts. I calmed and I quieted. And though I just explored visualizing God as parent, which is a predominant metaphor throughout the Bible, David is casting himself as the coddling mother. So if you would, conjure the imagery. A mother holding a young child. Weaning in this cultural setting likely took place around 3 years of age. A weaned child does not scratch and tug for nourishment. He or she has matured. The child can simply be held without needing to scramble for attention. It no longer associates mother with survival alone. There blooms a more complex relationship, a richer one that is composed of speech and laughter, discipline and direction, song and story. As primal need has matured into deeper need, the child is free to soak in the warmth and intimacy of the mother's strong arms, steady heart, and knowing eyes. There is a depth in the silence, relational certainty, utter trust, and calm oneness. What a potent image in just a few words. We can be free to appropriate this image in our time with God. Paul discusses our relationship with Jesus in terms of infancy and human development. Again, God is our parent, and we should seek this kind of growing intimacy with him. Yet David uses this imagery to describe his care for his own soul. Does this mean that I have some sort of internal responsibility before God to calm my wailing soul as I pray? The cautionary voice of the teacher in Ecclesiastes, commonly thought to be David's own son Solomon, says, "Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few," calling the blurted out speech sacrifice of fools. This is from Ecclesiastes 5:1 and 2. In our scramble to gain language for prayer, perhaps we have found its counterpart, silence. The silence of marvel, the silence of adoration, the silence of maturity, the silence of trust, relational silence. Let the familiarity, the humanness of this short prayer wash over you. Breathe. Feel the struggles of your soul, its whines for attention and nourishment. Acknowledge them. Your soul may feel the newborn at times, the wise elder at others, and still yet the child. Let things you don't understand ebb away in the doting arms of the parent. As you attempt to rock your soul into silence before God, fix your lowered eyes and humbled heart on the arms of the Father who loves you as his own. Be in the mystery and silence of relational intimacy with Yahweh. When we do this, we can, as the psalm closes, exhort others from a place of held and cherished certainty that all can put their hope in the God whose beauty and intimacy can still the soul.